I'm raising the roof, whoop, whoop, on that Craftsman structure we started last week on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more videos about model railroading tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure and hit the subscribe button down below and click on that little bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new episode. In last week's installment, I started building the Blair Line in-scale Leighton Depot, a laser-cut wood Craftsman kit. We did some weathering to replicate some peeling paint on the exterior of the building, as well as on the trim, and we assembled the main part of the building. Today we're going to complete that building, but we're going to do a little bit of kit bashing as we do. The roof on the kit was a little too steep and a little bit too unusual to replicate the depot that I needed to represent on my layout. So I've re-engineered the roof out of styrene and then covered it with the shingles that were supplied with the kit. Today I'll show you exactly how I did that, as well as a little bit more weathering and some other details that I added as I completed the structure. Finally, I'll show you exactly where it fits into my layout. So now let's get back over to the workbench and continue with this project. I'm back to work on the roof of my depot kit, and I've been looking and playing around a little bit with some ideas about the roof. And here's my issue that I'm dealing with right now. If you look at the box and you get a picture of what the kit is designed to look like, you see it has a very steep roof. And if you can tell, like right here, the roof comes down at a steep pitch. It's actually a 10-12 pitch. And then when it comes to the eave, it flattens out a little bit. So it's got kind of this two-stage pitch to it. Here's a picture of the actual depot that I'm trying to model. And as you can see, it has a hip roof, but you can see, number one, this is a simple slope. It's a single slope all the way to the edge. And also, this is a much less steep slope. This is, I would say, probably a 7-12 pitch, which is a lot flatter than the 10-12 pitch of the Leighton Depot. What I've decided to do is I've decided to kit bash the roof portion of this depot to make a hipped roof that is actually a 5-12 pitch. And here's a picture that I've drawn using some of the pieces from the kit. What you see on top here is the actual pitch, the two-stage pitch of the depot as it comes in the kit. And what you see that I've drawn down below here is actually what a simple pitched 5-12 roof would look like. And so this is what we're going to do. I'm going to make the support structure and the sheathing for the roof out of styrene, but then once we shingle it and get the trim on it, I think it'll look very natural on this depot. So what I have figured out by measuring some of the pieces that I have is that the overall width of this roof is 32 feet, which means it's 16 feet from the edge to the center. And at a 5-12 pitch, that means I'm going to rise in the center a total of 7.5 scale feet. And so I'm going to show you how we're going to kit bash the support structure and the sheathing for this roof, and then we're going to work on getting this finished up. So the first thing I did is I got some 40,000th styrene, which I'm going to use for the supports for the roof. And I just went through and marked all of these angled supports. I need 4 of these that are the full width of the roof, which is 32 feet, and marked off at the correct pitch, which is 7.5 feet to the peak from the at the center of the pitch. I'm going to use the original piece of wood that is the base for the roof because it's the right size, and I'll lay this out on there. I need 4 of these. 3 of them will go across like this to support the roof in the middle. The 4th one will actually be cut in half, and it will be the support that will support the hip part of the roof on each end, here and here. And then the angles for the ridges, I'll show you how we cut those in a little bit. But first I need to cut these out and get them glued together and in place. And literally all I need to do is come in here with a nice straight edge, a steel ruler in this case, Get it right on each of these lines. I want to cut dead on the line on each one of these, and I'm just going to score it, starting off with light passes at first so that my ruler doesn't move, and just going to score it several times, and then we will come back and snap it in two, and there we have that cut made. And I'll come back with just some probably 220 grit sandpaper and just clean up those rough edges. They're not going to show, but I just want to make sure that they're nice and straight and clean whenever we go to do our gluing. Now I've cut all of my roof supports, and now I need to glue the supports for the hips onto the supports for the main part of the roof. You can see these two sections have a mark made right down the middle, so I know exactly where the center line is. This was cut exactly like these, and then I just cut it exactly in half down the middle to make the support for the hip on each end. And I checked all of these to make sure they were exactly the same size and sanded them just a little bit to make sure that I had nice, flat, smooth edges to work with. I'm in my gluing jig now, and I'm literally just going to glue these end hip supports on exactly perpendicular and square to my other supports like this. So I'm going to come in with my couple of my magnets just to hold this in place, and I'm going to get a magnet here to make sure that this is centered and plumb. Trying to keep my hands out of the way so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to come in then with a little bit of solvent cement and just glue that joint. I'm going to put a little glue on both sides and hold that in place for a minute. Show you what I've done here now. I took these pieces that I was gluing together for my pitch across the main part of the roof and the supports for the hips. Took those two pieces, my other support piece for the main part of the roof. I cut a couple of just braces to kind of tie everything together to make it one assembly. So these were just pieces that were the same height as the pitch, which in this case is 7.5 scale feet. And I took my roof base and laid out exactly where these were going to sit on the roof base, and made sure those lines were nice and square. And then I measured this distance and subtracted the thickness of this piece of styrene in the center, and then cut these two pieces to length and glued everything together with solvent cement. And so now I've got one complete unit. Now I'm going to just glue this onto the base for the roof. I'm going to do that using CA. CA is perfect for this particular step because these are dissimilar materials. In other words, I'm gluing plastic to wood, I'm gluing a non-porous material to a porous material, and CA is a perfect kind of adhesive for those types of situations. Now that we have our roof support structure glued onto the base for our roof, we need to cut these supports for the hips themselves. And we can do some geometry to figure out exactly what the pitch and the length of those would be. But in this case, with this support structure in place, with everything exactly even and square the way it should be, we can just measure this. And now most scale rulers start with 0, not quite on the end of the ruler. But in this case, we're going to measure from the end of the ruler, knowing that we're not making an exact measurement, but as long as we measure this from the end of the ruler and the piece that we cut from the end of the ruler, it will measure out fine. So I'm just going to stick the end of my ruler all the way up in this corner, measure to the very corner of my base, and I see that comes out to be 20.5 feet. Now, if everything is in place as it should be and square, that should be the same on all 4 corners. And so I'll measure here, and I get 20.5 feet. Here, 20.5, and here, 20.5. So everything should be nice and square, it looks like, because those are all coming out the same. Now to cut those, I'm literally going to get another piece of this styrene, the same height as this, because the height of this ridge is the same as the height of the ridge of the roof. So as long as I make a square corner, measure out 20.5 feet from the end of my ruler this direction, that angle should be exactly what I need for all 4 of these supports. I've cut one. I started off by just cutting a strip of 40 thousandths styrene, just like I did for my other supports, and measured down 20.5 feet from the end of my ruler to make a mark here, and then cut an angle line across there. And I come up with this piece, and as you see, it fits in here just perfectly. It comes right to the corner. The height is just right. And of course, if you remember from your geometry class, when you've cut one angle here, obviously you've got the angle for the next one. All I gotta do is cut this one off square, and I'll have my next one done. And then I'll cut 2 more to put in the corners. And then I'm going to come in and glue these in just like I did glue this other together. I'm going to put some solvent cement here to glue it to the rest of the structure. And before I do that, I'll put it in place with some CA on the base, and we'll glue all that together. Now that we have all of our support structure intact, glued together, everything is in place and solid, now it's time to start cutting the sheathing for our roof. I'm going to use styrene for this as well, and to get these pieces right, first I'm going to cut the 2 main roof pieces that go up each side, the larger pieces. And in order to get those cut to size and shape, I need to know, first of all, the total width of the roof from the eave to the peak. And so I've measured up each of these just to make sure that they were the same. And what I've come up with is that I need an 18-foot wide piece to go from the frieze board here, the fascia, up to the peak. Now that 18 feet goes up to the center of the peak, and of course I'll have to sand these pieces at a little bit of an angle, a little bit of a bevel, where they go together at the peak in order to make them fit together nice and tightly. Probably have to sand just a little bit of a bevel on the eave edge as well, so that my trim will fit on there and look correct. But we'll come back and worry about that later. So 18 feet wide. And then, of course, my total roof length is 48 feet. But I need to make this hip in here. And so I know that this distance horizontally from where this very corner of where these hips meet to the outer edge, this is 16 feet. Remember, we cut these pieces 16 feet long to make the hip supports there. They're exactly half of the distance here in order to keep that same pitch on the hip as we have on the main part of the roof. So I'm going to cut a trapezoid here that's 48 feet long, but that hips in 16 feet on each side, and we're going to draw that out on some styrene, and I'll show you what that looks like. Here I've laid out and marked out those 2 main roof sections. I cut a strip that was 18 scale feet wide, which was the distance that I needed from the peak down to the fascia board. Measured 48 feet in length, and duplicated that twice. And then from each end at the ridge, I have measured in 16 feet on each side and made an angle from that point down to the corner. And these 2 trapezoids should fit just right with just a little bit of sanding to get the bevels correct. I've cut out my 2 main roof pieces, and I've gone ahead and used a sanding stick to begin to bevel the edges so that they will meet well at the ridge as well as along the hips of the hip roof. You can see here as I put these together that they're meeting pretty well. Now this is going to cover with shingles, so I'm not overly concerned about these the ridge or the hips being perfectly tight together. But I want them tight enough together that there aren't gaps that would be noticeable underneath the shingles. What is more important is along the roof edge itself, where the eave will be, or the fascia board. I need to sand a bevel on that so that my fascia board will go on nice and flat and plumb. Now, whenever I am sanding a bevel, I use a sanding stick, and I usually kind of eyeball this, but I hold the piece of material I'm working on at the right angle on the sanding stick so that I get the right angle, and then I begin to sand. And I use a moderately coarse sanding stick to begin with so I can take some more material off. But what you want to do is you want to work very carefully here. You want to sand just a few strokes and then turn it over and check it to make sure that your bevel is going to be even all the way across, and make sure that you're not working too hard on one end and not hard enough on the other, so that you can keep your edge nice and straight and get a consistent bevel. So I'm doing that, of course, on all of these edges to some extent. I especially want to get a nice bevel along where that fascia board is going to be. And then I've already begun also cutting out the end pieces. Now, here's one that I have laid out and one that I have cut already. And these were, again, just some simple math here. We know that my roof is 32 feet wide this way. I know that I want it to come to a point exactly in the middle, so that would be at 16 feet. I know that my distance from the eave up to the top of my pitch is 18 feet, because this is the same pitch and the same height as what I had on the sides, and it was 18 feet from the eave to the top of the pitch, or to the ridge. So it should be the same here. And I measured it to double check, and sure enough it is exactly 18 feet from the fascia up to the end of the ridge. So I know that I want an 18-foot wide piece of material, which I just used some more of the same strip that I had cut for my main roofing, because it was 18 feet wide, cut it 32 feet in length, measured to the center at 16, and made a point at that point, and then just cut the angles to the corners. Once I had cut one, as you see, the angle was right from the one to cut the next one. So I was able to take the next one, just measure 32 feet, mark from the point that I had cut, which is at the center at 16, down to that point, mark a line, and then I'll come back and scribe and cut that. Well, I have all of my roof sheathing pieces cut. I have my framework in place and all together, so I'm ready to start gluing these sheathing pieces onto the roof framework itself. Now, this is a situation where I'm going to be gluing styrene to styrene, so I'm going to be using solvent cement. So I'm going to have to very delicately balance the need to work quickly before the solvent cement sets up, and yet to take enough time to make sure that I get the pieces to all fit together correctly. This is one time when I am actually going to use the brush that comes out of the solvent cement bottle, rather than a micro brush or my touch and flow applicator, because I want to put plenty of solvent on each one of these pieces that it will stay wet and soft until I get the next the piece of sheathing in place. So I want to make sure I get plenty on there. So I'm going to start with this main roof piece and work my way around, and I'm going to try to work quickly enough to get them all fitted together. And I'm going to let you watch me do this as I go. Now, to me, I think it's most important to get plenty of solvent down low on these pieces, because I can always try to use capillary action to get some more solvent in from the top. It's going to be very hard to get more in from the bottom. And I'm going to try to quickly begin to fit these together. And few little gaps that I have are very small, and when you put shingles on, they will cover up completely. You won't see them at all. I've got a little issue here where this is kind of sticking up a little along this, but I think I can come in with a sanding stick and just knock the corner of that off, and I think that will smooth up nicely. I'm also going to come back with a sanding stick and just go around the edges one more time to make sure that all of those edges are nice and clean and square, so that when I put my trim on, it will go on neatly there. As you can see, I have my roofing material now painted. So we're going to bring our roof back in here and begin the process of installing this. Now this roofing material is literally peel and stick. I have to cut each one out of the carrier, and then I'm going to turn it to the back, and I'll use my hobby knife to try to get the backing peeled off. There it comes. Now what we want to do, of course, as we start this, is to start right along the edge of the roof. Just going to use the edge of the roof as a guide, and I'm going to put this first piece down all the way to the edge, and I want to go from corner to corner. As we continue up the roof, we want each of these pieces to just barely overlap the piece before. This will be a little more forgiving with me right now because I modified the roof, and therefore my modified roof is a little smaller, so I'm going to have a little more material than I would have had if I had made the original roof. But nonetheless, we don't want to get careless with this. Getting that backing started off at these very, very thin pieces is sometimes a challenge, and I am facing that challenge right now. There it comes. So we want to make sure we keep these nice and straight. We want to just barely overlap the previous piece, and a little too far this direction. Still a little too far this direction. Definitely want to take as much time as it takes to get them on nice and straight to begin with. I've completed the installation of the shingles and the ridge caps, and they came out looking pretty nice. I got a couple places where a shingle or two and some of the ridge caps are wanting to curl up. That peel and stick adhesive isn't real strong. And I think I'm going to take a little diluted white glue and a fine brush and work under some of those areas just to help stick them down a little bit. But I think it's going to look pretty good. Went ahead and glued the roof to the building, installed it pretty much like I did the walls earlier, as you saw in our previous video. And just have a few details left to take care of. We've got the fascia boards that need to be installed around the roof, and those are just peel and stick trim like we saw on the rest of the building in the first video. Need to paint the foundation still a light gray to simulate the concrete of the slab. I'm going to do a little weathering on the roof so it'll match the weathered building. And also I got a few scraps that I painted a gray color to simulate an electrical meter, an electric box, and some conduit. And I'm going to install those on the end of the building that will be facing out towards the aisle. And here you see the final product on my layout and the place that it's going to be. And I think this came out looking pretty good. There you see that electrical box detail on the end. You see I weathered the roof with just a little bit of black along the edges of the roll roofing and a few streaks down the sides of the roof. And I think it came out with a really realistic and a very pleasing look, and I really like the way it's going to work on my layout. I really like the way this structure came out. The weathering came out exactly the way I hoped it would, and this kit provided exactly the amount of selective compression that I wanted from the prototype building to fit into the space that I had on my layout. If you've never tried building a laser cut wood kit, I highly recommend that you give one a try. They can be a little more challenging, but if you take your time, you read the instructions completely, and you work slowly and carefully, I think you'll find it very rewarding, and the completed structures often come out very nice. Tell me about some of your experiences building Craftsman kits. Or if you've never tried one and you have some concerns, let me know what they are in the comments section down below. I look forward to reading those comments. I hope you've enjoyed this two-part series on this Craftsman kit. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll give me a thumbs up down below. And remember to subscribe and hit that little bell icon so you can catch future episodes. If you found these videos useful, share them on your social media or model railroad forums that you participate in so others can enjoy them as well. Finally, check out that expanded description right below this video. There you'll find a link to my Patreon page where you can learn about the rewards and incentives that I offer for those who support Ron's Trains and Things. Or if you'd like to just make a one-time gift, you can do that through my PayPal Me. There's also a link to that in the description. And you'll also see my Amazon Pick of the Week, some products that I have found useful and you may find interesting as well. Well, that's all I have for today, but I hope you'll join me next week for another How To Tuesday model railroading video, and I look forward to seeing you then. Busy?